Now, Brittany, what you're going to do is you're going to get engaged to Jason. I know he's a little bit nerdy, but you know, you're going to get, he's stable and he's going to be good for you and my grandbabies. Brittany, part of him getting engaged to you is him taking on that co-conservatorship. I don't want to hear about it. It has to happen. You can't go through this world by yourself, and your daddy and I aren't going to live forever. So Jason's going to have to take over here at some point. You know, and for Brittany to be like, well, it's gross now. But why, Brittany? Hey, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. Today we're doing part 5 of the Britney Spears memoir. So we're going to cover about 8 more chapters, maybe a little more, a little less. It depends. But this whole section is about the conservatorship. And the flavor of this section is very different from what we've gotten so far. So, you know, I feel like at the beginning of the book, Brittany leaned very heavily on her ghostwriter to help her explain and organize her thoughts. Her voice still came through, but the writing was a little bit more pointed and purposeful. This section sounds very much like the ghostwriter sort of like let her just take over on this section, and I would not say it's to the book's credit. It's very uninteresting because it's not self-reflective at all. And even though I completely sympathize with the devastation of having all your freedom taken away and having to be placed under the authority of somebody who you thought did not have your well-being at hand and never had, I sympathize with that, and that would be devastating and just a sort of emotionally and psychologically crippling to feel like you were trapped by people who were supposed to love you, and because it was your own parents, the whole world was like, well, it must be okay. I understand that must have been really hard, but the tone of this section is very pouty, and it really, there's very little honest self-assessment about, okay, but how did I find myself in this position? You know, and she does a lot of this. She was doing a lot of this in the last section, but she certainly leans heavily on it now of, I just wanted to be a normal person, and partying is normal, and my parents and the whole world shouldn't have used that as evidence that I was a poor mother. But I said this in the previous episode, but I would just like to really reiterate, that's not a good enough excuse to say, well, everybody else can do it, so why can't I? Well, number one, you're not everybody else. But number two, if you know that the world is looking for a reason to take your kids away from you, wouldn't you do everything in your power to make sure that you appeared very stable? And she does a lot of, my kids were everything to me. They're the only things I've ever really loved. Being with them is like being with God. That sounds really awesome. But if that's really how you feel, then why were you missing court dates? Why were you behaving in a way that seemed as though you were out of control? Why were you acting, in your own words, crazy? Because Brittany says, I was acting crazy. But, you know, but she keeps wanting to be like, but it's because I was so sad. But that doesn't even make sense. If you want your kids back and you know that the very thing you're doing is the reason you don't have your kids, then why would you keep doing it? My patience for that excuse is running low. And this section was not nearly as interesting as previous sections. So this episode probably won't be as long because there's just not as much to get into. It's very repetitive towards the end, and very much her reiterating once again all of the ways that she has been grieved, all the ways that she has been misused, abused, and mistreated, and how the whole world is very hypocritical because they'll let men get away with the very things that she was doing. Yeah, you know what? You're probably right, Brittany, but you can't control that. You can only control you. So if you have figured out thus far that people don't like it when you behave in a certain way, and that's why you don't have your kids, then don't publicly go out behaving that way. Like I said before, if you want to have a party, okay, well, do it in your own home where there's no documentation of it. So, okay, that's sort of some of my thoughts about this. With that being said, though, there's definitely some interesting parts here, especially when she's talking about Lynn's memoir and just various things that happened during the conservatorship, the rights that were taken away from her, the tricks that were played on her. I mean, it's not that there's nothing here. I'm just saying the book is going downhill. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 30, she starts by talking in this chapter about her mom's memoir. So her mom had come out with a book. It's really rich that Lynn thought that she could write a book, because what does she have to say? Now, some people had surmised at the time that she was going to write a parenting manual, and so there's lots of people eager in the wings to leap on her, because at this point she had a daughter that was 16-year-old and pregnant. Britney Spears is obviously wilding out. And so there's lots of people who were ready to jump on her if she was even thinking about writing a parenting book. She was not. It happened to be ghosted by a person who had written parenting books before. So that's why people thought that was what she was writing, but it wasn't. And she just thought that it was time for her to put her perspective down so that the world could know. And what I think it is that she just wanted to scrub from her own identity the guilt that was being heaped upon her by the world, as they looked on at Britney and thought, well, what in the world is the matter with Lynn? You know, and so, I mean, I can understand the desire to distance yourself from what you feel like is an unfair narrative, but I think that the very fact that she's coming out writing a book about her daughter at her daughter's peak heartbreak and breakdown would indicate to all of us what we already suspected about Lynn. You are not a very good mother. So her trying to write a book that comes out and sort of reintroduces the world to herself, you know, as just this sweet Southern mom who's just confounded like the rest of the world at what happened to Britney, doesn't quite play out when you're on a morning show talking about the very person who's having a breakdown and wondering why she is, as you disengaged yourself from her so that you can get some more publicity for yourself. Okay. Britney says, as everything was falling apart for me, my mother was writing a memoir. She wrote about watching her beautiful daughter shaving off her hair and wondering how that was possible. She said that I used to be the, quote, happiest little girl in the world. When I made the happiest little girl in the world, that's just like in the beginning of all those true crime documentaries. They lit up the room when they walked in. You know, they were the life of the party. It's like, what are these phrases? How about we describe people in terms that are actually unique to them? Anyway. When I made the wrong move, it was like my mother wasn't concerned. She would share my every mistake on television, promoting her book. She wrote it trading on my name and talking about parenting of me and my brother and sister at a time when all three of us kids were basket cases. Jamie Lynn was a pregnant teenager. Brian was struggling to find his place in the world and still convinced he was letting our father down, and I was in full meltdown. Well, Britney's confounded as to why her mother would pick that time to come out. That's exactly what time a person like Lynn would pick to come out. She's horrified by what the fruit of her loins are up to. And so she's over here trying to run damage control. You know, her tender Southern ego can't handle it. Oh my gosh, what in the world are people going to think about me and my babies? Brian doesn't know what's going on. His daddy's made him feel so bad about himself, and he's just wandering around. Jamie Lynn, oh my God, is pregnant. And Britney, I can't even get into it. I mean, she is ugly. Oh, her behavior's ugly. But have you seen her without her hair? Oh my God, when I saw that, I was like, baby girl, you have got to do something. I mean, it's hard to look at her. It's hard to look at her. It's been hard to look at her because she's just been such a holy mess. But now, I mean, it's like, I can't even spare a minute for it. You know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating to see her like that, you know? It just seems like she wouldn't want to look so bad all the time. I mean, I didn't raise her to look like that. I raised her to take care of herself, you know? She's a young lady. I don't know why she'd want to shave her head like some little street boy. I don't know. When the book came out, she appeared on every morning show to promote it. I would turn on the TV to see B-roll of me and my shaved head flashing on the screen. My mother was telling the host of the Today Show that she'd spent hours wondering how things went so wrong with me. On another show, the audience clapped when she said my sister was pregnant at 16. That was classy as shit, apparently, because she was still with the father. Yes, how wonderful. She was married to her husband and having a baby at 17. They're still together. Great. Doesn't matter that she's a child having a child. That's what I'm saying about this particular section of the book. As entertaining as it is for us, Britney's biting tone sort of demeans her perspective because, of course, we expect that she'd be upset. But in order to rise above the incidents and in order to make herself seem even more sane, she's got to cool it on the judgmental perspective of her family and try to just be a little bit more level-headed about it, even though I know that would be so hard. I totally understand that what's happened to her is ridiculous. But in order for us to hear the pointed objections she has to her care, she can't get petty. But the ghostwriter kind of let her just, you know, run rampant on this section. Britney says, I was in one of the darkest times of my life, and my mom was telling audiences, oh yeah, well, here's Britney. I mean, I don't know what happened. The book was huge for her and all at my expense. The timing was uneffing believable. I'm willing to admit that in the throes of severe postpartum depression, abandonment from my husband, the torture of being separated from my two babies, the death of my adored Aunt Sandra, and the constant humdrum of pressure from the paparazzi, I'd begun to think in ways like a child. And yet, I look at the worst I did during that time, and I don't believe the sum total of them is anywhere near as cruel as what my mother did by writing and promoting that book. She was on morning shows trying to sell her book about when I was in hospitals and being driven insane because I was separated from my babies for weeks on end. She was making money off of that dark time. You know, here's the thing. It is pretty shocking that they could all point a finger at Brittany and say, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy. And then her mother could do something completely insane, like writing a memoir about her daughter who's in full meltdown so that she can have a moment for herself in the spotlight and look like she's the one in control. Like, that's crazy. Everybody wants to point a finger at Brittany, but a mom doing that, that's cruel and insane. In those days, I wasn't the brightest bulb on the tree. It's the truth. But what plenty of people took away from my mom's book was, oh, Brittany's so bad. Her book even made me believe I was bad. And she did it at a time when I already felt so much shame. Brittany is so impressionable, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, yes, your mother is saying that you're bad in her book. And that would have been heartbreaking to have your mother say those things. Absolutely, it would have been soul crushing. But at the same time, you just have to ask yourself, well, were you being bad though? Were you running around in clubs? Were you walking through the streets, with barely any clothes on? Were you just like getting into and starting really bad relationships just like as a middle finger to the world? I mean, your mother is saying some things that are unkind and her behavior is unkind and she's saying that you're bad. But far apart from what your mother's doing, you've called your own actions bad. And I mean, I know Brittany is incredibly impressionable. She's probably the sort of person who would admit to a crime she had not committed. But even though it seems like she wants to blame the fact that she has this poor self-esteem on what everybody else was saying about her, factually, she was doing things that were unwise and not necessarily great, and certainly not great if she wanted her kids back. So I just wish that she could articulate the pain that she felt at her mother doing things, but also be able to say, I was making poor choices. And she does say I was making poor choices, but in sort of a flippant way, like, well, I've got to get that out of the way so nobody points a finger at me. But you don't get the feeling that she really believes that anything that she did should have warranted any kind of consequence. I don't think it warranted the conservatorship that went on for 13 years, but certainly if your family saw you acting like that, who among us, if we had a family member who was doing all the things that Britney Spears was doing and we all saw it, would you not be like, whoa, sister's off the rails? Would you not be like, family council, we need to have an intervention? I mean, surely you would do something like that for a loved one. If one of your brothers or sisters was acting like that, something had to be done. And maybe Brittany just wanted to have a sit-down talk, but I don't think that she would have accepted that sit-down talk. The conservatorship, obviously, we all think that was bogus, but something had to be done. And Brittany has got to stop acting like everybody should have just seen what she was doing and then gave her kids anyway. I don't think she was acting like a responsible parent at all. I as a mother, I sympathize with her deeply at the loss of her kids, but she wasn't acting like she wanted them back because she wasn't doing what needed to be done. Anyway, she goes on to say that the pain of seeing her mother trot that book around was so painful that even to this day, she says, I swear to God, it makes me want to cry to think about my kids going through anything hard like I was going through when they were babies. If one of my sons was going through something like that, do you think I would write a book about it? I'd fall to my knees. I'd do anything I could do to help him through it, to hold him, to make it better. The last thing I would do would be to cut my hair into a bob and put on a tasteful pantsuit and sit down on a morning show and make money off my child's misfortune. Sometimes I talk trash on Instagram and people don't know why I have such anger toward my parents, but I think if they were in my shoes, they would understand. Yeah, I mean, we do understand for sure. We totally get that your parents are out of line and they took the cruelest possible means of getting into your bank account. Like, we get it. Your parents have misused you and abused you 100%. But I think that there has got to be some accountability here. This is not victim shaming. Like, we get that her parents have misused and abused her, but there were so many times when Britney, rather than investigate a little bit, rather than figure out some things for herself, rather than try to stand up for herself, she let herself be the victim, and then she would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. Well, don't stand in the way of the truck. If you know that your family is crazy, if you know that the people you're working with are crazy, don't stand in the middle of the road waiting for them to run you over with their truck. Get out of the road. Chapter 31. She's become enslaved to the family at this point. She says the conservatorship was created supposedly because I was incapable of doing anything at all, feeding myself, spending my own money, being a mother, anything. So why was it that a few weeks later they had me shoot an episode of How I Met Your Mother and then sent me on a grueling world tour? After the conservatorship started, my mother and my brother's girlfriend got short haircuts and went out to dinner drinking wine. Paparazzi were there taking their picture. It all felt set up. My dad took my boyfriend away and I could not drive. My mom and dad took my womanhood from me. It was a win-win for them. This passage here is a real snapshot of what the rest of this section feels like. It's like in her mind she's got a point she's trying to make, but it's not necessarily coming out on the page. You know, saying that her conservatorship started and then her mother and her brother's girlfriend got short haircuts and went out drinking and the paparazzi were taking pictures, and then my dad took my boyfriend away, and then my mom and my dad took my womanhood away. It's like, it's a lot of thoughts. I think what she's trying to say is everybody else's life went on as normal, and everybody else was swimming in the glow of this newfound fame at her expense. And none of them were paying the price that she was having to pay for their good time. But she doesn't say that. It's just a bunch of garbled thoughts. And that's really, by and large, what this section felt like to me. It was very annoying and frustrating. It felt like the editor kind of gave up at this point. So we're like more than 3/4 of the way through the book, and it just feels like the editor was like, okay, I think people probably got the point. I'll just close up shop here. Anyway, she goes on to say that she remained shocked that the state of California would let a man like my father, an alcoholic, someone who declared bankruptcy, who'd failed in business, who terrified me as a little girl, that they would let this man control me after all of my accomplishments and everything I had done. She said my father presented the conservatorship as a great stepping stone on the road to my, quote, comeback. Just months earlier, I'd released my best album of my career, but fine. What I heard and what my father said was, she's great now. She's working for us. It's a perfect situation for our family. She says, was it great for me or was it great for him? How fun, I thought. I can go back to working again like nothing at all happened. Too sick to choose my own boyfriend, and yet somehow healthy enough to appear on sitcoms and morning shows and to perform for thousands of people in a different part of the world every week. From that point on, I began to think that he saw me as put on earth for no other reason than to help their cash flow. What I think is interesting is that if a person was truly in need of a conservatorship, they wouldn't even be able to connect the dots here. They wouldn't even be able to come up with this thought that, hey, isn't it weird that I have to go on the morning show and go on tours all over the world and keep writing and recording songs, but they get all the money and I have to do all the work? Like, I think somebody who's so debilitated that they need a conservatorship to control their life would not even be able to come up with that thought, let alone actually go out and do the tour. She said, here's my confession. I was so nerdy that I kept all my receipts in a bowl. Each week, I would add up my expenses, old school style, to keep track of my deductions for taxes. Even when I was going through a wild spell, the fundamentals of who I was as a person were still there. To me, that bowl of receipts was proof that I was still capable of managing my affairs. I knew musicians who did heroin, got in fistfights, and threw TVs out of hotel windows. Not only didn't I steal anything or hurt anyone or do hard drugs, I was keeping track of my tax deductions. Not anymore. My father shoved aside my bowl of receipts, setting up things on the bar. I just want to let you know, he said, I call the shots. You sit right there in that chair and I'll tell you what goes on. I looked at him with a growing sense of horror. I'm Britney Spears now. What the hell kind of a situation is this? You know, I mean, definitely shocking. I'm Britney Spears now. I mean, what in the world? It's like, is he a TV villain? Okay, but you guys, let's just talk for a minute. Do you guys think Britney Spears was really adding up her receipts at the end of every week for tax deductions? I appreciate the point she's trying to make, that she could control her life, and I would 100% say that she probably did that a few times. You know, she probably learned how to do that, you know, and some of the little bit of schooling that she had received along the way, a little bit of schooling that her family saw to it that she got. But I don't think that this Britney Spears is doing anything with her receipts at the end of every week. I just find that really difficult to imagine. I'm struggling with that particular story. I'm struggling to believe that one to its fullest extent. Not that she didn't do it sometimes or had done it before, but every week? Seems like if you were that meticulous a person, you would know how to get your kids back. Okay, so chapter 32, the conservatorship is really raging in earnest at this point. And things are reading very spacey. Lots of little details, but lots of repeats. The ghostwriter is clearly very unpresent. On the rare occasion that I went out, like to my agent and friend Cade's house for a dinner party, the security team would sweep through the house before I arrived to make sure there was no alcohol or drugs, even Tylenol. No one at the party was allowed to drink until I left. The other guests were all very good sports about it, but I sensed that the second I left was when the real party started. When someone wanted to date me, the security team who answered to my father would run a background check on him and made him sign an NDA and even had him submit to a blood test. And my father said that I couldn't see the photographer that I had been dating ever again, too. She's already repeated that she can't see him. Do you see what I'm saying? Twice already in the span of the last 2 chapters, she's already said, my dad won't let me have my boyfriend. My dad won't let me see my boyfriend. My dad won't let me see my boyfriend. Again, my dad, can you believe it? He won't let me see my boyfriend. Do you see? We're really losing some of the structure we had previously. She said that before a date, Robin would tell the man my medical and sexual history. Okay, this right here was a question mark for me. Who is Robin? We have not gotten any word about who this person was and what this person's involvement was. And I mean, I've combed through this. I cannot see who is Robin. So now we're just naming people that the audience doesn't even know. But apparently this was somebody who was in charge or working for her father with the conservatorship. She said before a date, Robin would tell the man my medical and sexual history. To be clear, this was before the first date. The whole thing was humiliating, and I knew that the insanity of this system kept me from finding basic companionship, having a fun night out with friends, or making new friends, let alone falling in love. That is ridiculous. That definitely seems designed just to humiliate her and make sure she would never find anyone, because who would submit to that? Britney Spears has been such a public mess. I think she would have, on her own, had a difficult time finding a meaningful relationship, because it might have been a little bit iffy to get into a relationship with her. Is she stable? But now, you've got the dad being like, well, if you want to date my daughter, better sit down, son, because I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to sign an NDA. You're going to get some blood work done. And I'm going to go through Britney's sexual history with you. My gosh. She said, thinking back on the way my father was raised by June and the way I was brought up by him, I had known from the jump that it would be an actual nightmare to have him in charge. The thought of my father taking over any aspect of my life had filled me with fear. But taking over everything? It was just the worst thing that could possibly ever happen in my life, my music, my career, and my sanity. Pretty quickly, I called the weird-ass lawyer the court had appointed for me and asked him for help. Incredibly, he was all I really had. But I felt that the court-appointed lawyer didn't seem eager to help me understand what was going on or to fight for my rights. She said my mother, who's best friends with the governor of Louisiana, could have put me on the phone with him, and he would have told me that I could get my own lawyer. But she kept it a secret. Instead, she got a lawyer for herself just so she could get off on fighting with my dad like she did when I was younger. Again, these are the ramblings of somebody who should have had an editor at this point. Why is her mom's friendship with the governor of Louisiana the thing that she's angry she didn't have access to? What's the governor of Louisiana supposed to do in this context? Like get on the phone with her and tell her all her legal rights? What's the governor know? I mean, maybe he went to law school. Lots of politicians did, but like it feels like she's just pointing a finger at her mom to point a finger at her mom. But like that doesn't really hold water. Like, what's stopping you from getting on the phone and calling a lawyer? What's stopping you from just like rising up and being your own advocate? I know at this point she like didn't even have a cell phone. But surely there's somebody within her circle that she could have gone to and been like, I think I need to get a different lawyer. This one's just really not helping me. But I mean, I truly, I think she was just so tired that she had just laid down and decided to take the beating. You know, I don't think there was any fight left in her. And she goes on to say as much. She says at various times I pushed back, especially when my father took away access to my cell phone. I would be smuggled a private phone and try to break free. See, who was smuggling her that private phone? Who was making sure she had a phone? You know, that person would have been somebody to say, hey, I really need a different lawyer. This is not working. Oh, but she says I was always caught and the phone was always taken away. After everything I had been through, I didn't have a lot of fight left in me. I was tired and I was scared too. And after being held down on a gurney, I knew they would restrain my body anytime they wanted to. I started to wonder if they wanted to kill me. I went on autopilot. If I play along, surely they'll see how good I am and they'll let me go. And so I went along with it. After I'd married Kevin and had my kids, Felicia was still there a little bit. I'd always adored her, but once I stopped touring and started working less, we fell out of touch. I later learned that my dad told her I didn't want her to work for me anymore. But I never said that. If I had known she wanted to do something for me, I never would have told her no. Without my knowledge, my father was keeping her from me. She says, I never saw some of my really close friends ever again. I still haven't to this day. It made me shut down psychologically even more than I had before, which is hard to imagine. She says that her parents tried to drum up some old friendships back from the homestead and try to get people from Louisiana to come visit her. She says their coming to see me felt more like sympathy than a social call. Help is good, but not if it's not asked for. Not if it doesn't feel like it's a choice. She says it's difficult for me to revisit this darkest chapter of my life and to think about what might have been different if I'd pushed back harder. I don't at all like to think about that, not whatsoever. I can't afford to, honestly. I've been through too much. That's a cop-out, though. It's a cop-out about how she got here. You know, just be like, you know, it's too hard for me to think about how I got here. You know, I can't afford to. I just can't. By yourself, yeah. I mean, probably you would need to have somebody help you walk through those memories, just because it is really easy to just close off your mind and heart when you feel like you've just been so wronged that if I keep thinking about it, I'm just going to get even more and more depressed because I don't know how to get out of this. I have been wronged terribly, but I don't know, like, well, I'm in it now. And sitting there thinking about all the things you wish you would have done differently is not really helpful. But she didn't have a roadmap on how to get out. So, I mean, I understand what she's saying in that I just can hardly think about it. It's just too hard. I can't afford that. But if you don't sit and do the practical work of figuring how you got here, how are you going to get out of the jungle, you know? She says, when the conservatorship happened, it was true that I had been partying. My body couldn't physically take anymore. It was time to calm down, but I went from partying a lot to being a total monk. I didn't do anything. One day I was with a photographer driving my car fast, living so much, and then all of a sudden I was alone, doing nothing at all, not even always allowed access to my own cell phone. In my old life, I'd had freedom, the freedom to make my own decisions. Even the hard days were my hard days. And once I gave up the fight in my new life, I would wake up each morning and ask one question: what are we doing? And then I would do what I was told. What I think is interesting is she says that in this new life, she has to just do everything that she's told, and that once she had been free. And that's the thing that is so hard for her to digest. But what I think is interesting, and I wonder if you agree with me, is that was Brittany ever free? Brittany was always reacting to her outside forces. She always wore shackles. She just couldn't see them. Now she can see the shackles, but how much freedom did she have when she was running around partying? That wasn't because she wanted to run around and party. It's because she was, in her own words, so sad and so grief-stricken by the turn of events that she was trying to cope with the sadness. So she's always been being forced to something. I don't know when was the last time she chose to do something because she wanted to do it and not because it was a reaction to the world. I think she maybe is romanticizing what it was to be quote-unquote free in her life. I don't think she's ever been happy. Well, she says, when I was alone at night, I would try to find inspiration in beautiful or transporting music, movies, and books. I'd look for other worlds to escape into. It seemed like every request went through my father and Robin. Again, who was Robin? They decided where I went and with who. Under Robin's direction, security guards handed me prepackaged envelopes of meds and watched me take them. They put controls on my iPad. Everything was scrutinized and controlled. Everything. I would go to sleep early, and then I'd wake up and do what they told me to do. And again, and again. It was like Groundhog Day. I did that for 13 years. If you're asking why I went along with it, there's one very good reason. I did it for my kids. Because I played by the rules, I was reunited with my boys. It was an ecstatic experience getting to hold them again. When they fell asleep next to me that first night we had back together, I felt whole for the first time in months. I just stared at them sleeping and felt so lucky. Well, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I'm just saying this could have been her life a lot sooner. But for the partying. And I've said it, so I won't keep making the point. But I know she's in a bad place, and I know that her parents have abused their authority in her life, but I would love for her to admit that some of this is a direct result of her choices. She says, to see my boys as much as possible, I did everything I could to appease Kevin. I paid his legal bills, plus child support, plus thousands more a month so the kids could come along with me on the circus tour. Within the same short period of time, I appeared on Good Morning America, did the Christmas tree lighting in Los Angeles. I shot a segment for Ellen. I toured through Europe and Australia. But again, the question was nagging at me. If I was so sick that I couldn't make my own decisions, why did they think it was fine for me to be out there smiling and waving and singing and dancing in a million time zones a week? Well, I'll tell you one good reason. The circus tour grossed more than $130 million. Lou Taylor's company, TriStar, got 5%. And I learned after the conservatorship that even when I was on hiatus in 2019 and money wasn't coming in, my father paid them an extra minimum flat fee so that they were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars more. My father got a percentage too. Plus, throughout the conservatorship, about $16,000 a month, which was more than he'd ever made before. He profited heavily from the conservatorship, becoming a multimillionaire. My freedom in exchange for naps with my children, it was the trade I was willing to make. There was nothing I love more, nothing more important to me on earth than my children. I'd lay down my life for them. So I thought, why not my freedom? Well, yeah, I mean, for sure, she's definitely, at this point, having to make that choice. At this point, that is the deal. Lay down your freedom so you can see your kids. I truly think, though, that this dramatic moment did not have to come. It didn't have to be a reality for her. It doesn't really do any good for me to keep saying that, because I'm sure she realizes it too. But I just would love for the book to really have dived into some specifics that Britney did. I mean, I guess it's not like a confession. You know, this book is not called The Confessions of Britney Spears. It's called her memoir. So it's about what she remembers and about what she felt, not necessarily the revelations or the lessons learned. So maybe I'm wanting the book to be something more than it is. But I have to say that all the chapters thus far are just very much the same. The conservatorship was arduous. It was a difficult 13 years for her, because again, what can you really relate about a whole period of time that felt the same every day? It's not like there's a lot of juicy, interesting details when you are being forced to do everything that the people around you tell you to do, and it's the same every day. It's like it would all just become sort of a haze. What I want to know, though, is would you ever let a security guard hand you a packet of medication and then take it? What did she think was going to happen if she didn't take it? Did she legitimately think that they would pin her down, force the medication in her mouth, or, as she says, kill her? Why would they kill the cash cow? One wonders. But I feel like I feel like her life has become so strange and so beyond anything she could have ever conceived of, and quite frankly, beyond anything any of us could conceive of if we found ourselves in the same place, that she's not making logical conclusions. Why would your family want to kill you if you were the reason that they're all so rich right now? What would the point of that be? But then also, why is she just laying down what little authority she has? She's still alive and kicking. If somebody hands you medication, who says you have to take it? I put that in my mouth and spit it right back out. You know? Or I would just flat refuse to do it. But I suppose if she had that kind of strength, she wouldn't be in this position in the first place. Okay, chapter 33, she says, I had resolved to go along with the conservatorship for the sake of my boys. But being in it was really hard. I knew there was something more inside me, but I felt it dimming every day. Over time, the fire inside me burned out. The light went out of my eyes. I know that my fans could see it. I have a lot of compassion for the woman I was before I was put into the conservatorship, when I was recording Blackout. Even though I was being described as so rebellious and such a wild girl, all my best work was accomplished during that time. All in all, though, it was a terrible time. I had my 2 little babies, and there was always a fight around me trying to see them. And she does say, and this is the kind of line that I'm looking for, where she says, I look back now and I think that if I'd been wise, I wouldn't have done anything but focus on my life at home, as hard as it was. At the time, Kevin would say, well, if you meet me this weekend, we'll have a 2-hour meeting and we'll do this and that, and I'll let you see the boys a little bit more. Everything was almost like a deal with the devil for me to get what I wanted. So we have like this glimmer of self-reflection. Why didn't I just spend more time focusing on home life instead of trying to run away from what was so hard? And then this sort of disconnected passage with Kevin telling her about, you know, if you do this, then you can see the kids a little bit more, and how she says that life was so hard because she had to make a deal with the devil. There's so much that she feels put upon her. And, you know, there was a number of people in the comments who said that the book is kind of disingenuous as far as her experience in the court system, that she was missing a lot of court dates over this custody battle, that she came into court acting strange. She'd come and then she'd leave. That the shaving of the head, there's some question about whether that was done because she was so emotionally distraught and it was an FU to society, which that's what she says it is. And it could very well have been, or if it was a reaction, like sort of a mixed reaction, like yes, FU to society, but also there was a threat that she was going to have a drug test done on hair follicle and they wouldn't be able to get her hair if she shaved it all off. And then there's some legitimate questions regarding that. And so I feel like the book is very vague and dishonest about the level of instability that Brittany was experiencing, brought on at her own hand. It's very much like I was having to make a deal with the devil because no one would wait and try to understand me and nobody would see my side of things. And the benefit for her, I suppose, in all this is that we can see that she's not lying there. But again, this is very patchy. It's very patchy. It's not one honest chapter have we received about these are the ways that I should have done things differently. I should have showed up into court on time. I shouldn't have just left. I shouldn't have showed up to court in my wedding dress at one point, like just acting strange. You know, it's just, she's like, yeah, you know, that weird ass lawyer I had. Well, but if that's your attitude about the court system, it's like, she just didn't feel like she had to honor, I think, the court system because she felt like it was being unfair to her. But in not trying to play by the rules, she never learned the rules. So then she was not able to play the game. Okay. She's repeating herself. I'm repeating myself. This is probably my least favorite chapter we've read so far. She goes on for a long stint in this section about how everybody is just a hypocrite, how all the guys she knows can do whatever, but she can't. You know, all of these things that we've heard before, that male pop stars are sleeping with lots of women, and that's awesome. And Kevin was leaving her alone with 2 babies while he wanted to go smoke pot and record a rap song titled some word I can't pronounce, which is slang for big ass in Portuguese. She says that, you know, he was getting articles written about him in Details magazine calling him Dad of the Year. She was being sued by paparazzi who said that she'd run over his foot. You know, Justin's over there cheating on her, but then Diane Sawyer's over there making her feel bad about life. And so all of it, like, we're going way back to all of her grievances, which I'm not saying are petty, but she's told us this, you know? So now it just feels like rather than spend time reflecting on choices, she just wants to continue to, you know, grind along. But see, I had to act this way because like everybody else was being really unfair. She concludes the passage in which she's reiterating all of the things that have been done wrong against her by both private individuals and the media, with this passage that truly is pretty sad and difficult. She says, if I thought getting criticized about my body in the press was bad, it hurt even more from my own father. He repeatedly told me that I looked fat and that I was going to have to do something about it. So every day I put on my sweats and I would go to the gym. I do a little bit of creative stuff here and there, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. As far as my passion for singing and dancing was almost a joke at that point. Feeling like you're never good enough is soul crushing. He drummed that message into me as a girl. And even after I'd accomplished so much, he was continuing to do that to me. You ruined me as a person, I wanted to tell my father. Now you're making me work for you. I'll do it, but I'll be damned if I'll put my heart into it. She said she'd just become a robot, but not just a robot, a sort of child robot. I had been so infantilized that I was losing pieces of what made me feel like myself. If they'd let me live my life, I know I would have followed my heart and come out of this the right way out, and it would have all worked out. 13 years went by with me feeling like a shadow of myself. I think back now on my father and his associates having control over my body and my money for that long, and it just makes me feel sick. The thing was, I accomplished a lot during that time when I was supposedly incapable of taking care of myself. In 2008, I won more than 20 awards, including a Cosmopolitan Ultimate Woman of the Year award. At the VMAs, just 1 year after I'd been mocked for my Gimme Me performance, I won 3 Moon Men. My video Piece of Me won every category it was nominated in, including Video of the Year. I thanked God, my sons, and my fans for standing by me. She says, I sometimes thought it was almost funny how I won those awards for the album I made while I was supposedly so incapacitated that I had to be controlled by my family. The truth was, though, when I stopped to think about it for very long, it wasn't funny at all. Yeah, I mean, it's devastating is what it is. The spaciness continues. I'm losing steam here on this. She says that she was miserable day to day, and she was only able to find joy and comfort in the boys and in her routine. Interestingly, she'd started dating Jason Trawick, that guy who was her brother's friend who checked on her that one time when she was in Las Vegas and Kevin had shown her the door and wouldn't let her come into his recording session. Well, now she's with Jason, and apparently she dated him for like 3 years. But it's very odd that he was even with her. He was 10 years older than her, like I said, but he just seems like a totally opposite person to her. She said he was hyper vigilant. She describes what she means by them not being a good fit, but I couldn't quite piece what it was she was saying about it. She says, when we went out together, he was hyper vigilant. I knew I could be clueless sometimes. I'm not clueless anymore. Now I'm basically a CIA agent. He was always scoping everything out, obsessively controlling situations. I'd been around the paparazzi so much that I knew what was up. I knew the deal. So to see him in a suit, working at this huge agency, getting in the car with me, I felt like he was almost too aware of who I was. He cared too much about managing things. I was used to photographers swarming me at the streets, and I hardly noticed them anymore, which I suppose isn't really good either. We did have a great relationship. I felt a lot of love for him and from him. Okay, am I the only one who doesn't get what she's talking about in this passage? I was clueless then, but now I'm basically a CIA agent, and my boyfriend was too aware of who I was to see him in a suit working at a huge agency getting in the car with me. I just wasn't sure about his hypervigilance. I'm like, what are you talking about? I think maybe what she means is just that because he wasn't in the industry in the same way that she was, he worked for an agency, he just wasn't used to the paparazzi. But see, now for her to act all cavalier about the paparazzi, it doesn't quite fit with the narrative we've gotten so far that they're the ones who drove her to insanity. Wouldn't she like the fact that this guy's hypervigilant, wanting to protect her from the situation? And she's like, I was used to it. I don't really know what his deal was. But that's the whole point, Brittany, that you are in a terrible situation because, as you say, it's from the paparazzi, and then you're dating a guy who wants to take it seriously with and for you, and you're like, he was just kind of like weird how much he couldn't handle it. I don't really get what she's talking about, and that goes for a lot of what we're about to read. She steps away from talking about that relationship to talk about her career and what she was doing for work at the time. She said, even though I was on a break from the Femme Fatale tour, my father second-guessed every little thing I did, including what I ate. It puzzled me that my mom never said anything about it. My parents got back together in 2010, 8 years after their divorce, and I felt so betrayed by the state of California. My mom seemed to love that because of the conservatorship, my dad now had a real job. They watched Criminal Minds on the couch every effing night. Who does that? When my father told me I couldn't have dessert, I felt like it was not just him telling me, but my family and my state. Like I was not allowed legally to eat dessert because he said so. Do you see what I'm saying about the poutiness of this section? Like, I just want us to talk seriously about what it was that they were up to. Like, let's get some more about how are they controlling you. Like, I want more about, you know, the rigmarole she'd have to go through if somebody wanted to date her, or what her day looked like as far as like them giving her medications, or what medications were they putting her on, you know. But to be like, then he wouldn't even let me have dessert or even look at my cell phone, or like, what in the world is my dad and my mom sitting on the couch watching effing Criminal Minds every night? Like, what the heck? Well, they're married now, and that's what married people do. You watch TV at the end of the day. If she's upset that her parents got back together, and she feels upset because she feels like it's predicated upon the fact that her conservatorship now gives the dad focus in his life, and so now the mom's attracted to him again, and that is a pretty messed up situation, then say that. Say that's what you're mad about, not that they sat on the couch every night like an old married couple watching true crime. Feeling like I needed more direction, I decided to go back to work. I tried to occupy myself by being productive. I began appearing on more TV shows, including in 2012 as a judge on The X Factor. I think a lot of people are really professional on TV, like Christina Aguilera and Gwen Stefani, but I was very, very nervous if I knew I had to be on air, and I didn't like being nervous all day long. Maybe I'm just not cut out for that anymore. Now, if you got me on a cute cameo on a fun TV show where I'm in and out in a day, that's one thing. But to act skeptical for 8 hours straight while judging people on TV, no thank you. I absolutely hated it. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that that would be a hard show to be on. I mean, even for all my catty responses to this book, for 8 hours a day, if I had to sit there and just come up with things to say to people who are clearly trying to perform and probably are trying to do their best, I mean, there are probably some people that just get on that show and act like fools just to have a moment on TV, but I would despise trying to judge people all day long, and you know, the crestfallen looks would just be really hard to handle. And especially for Brittany, if you felt like you had been judged your whole life, now to be on the other side where you're judging other people probably felt particularly unkind and harsh. Now, she says that around the same time she had gotten engaged to Jason. So even though she just finished telling us that it was a weird relationship where he was kind of an oddball, and he was, you know, Mr. Man in a suit, and, you know, she was pretty freewheeling about life, and it wasn't a super great setup. Against all odds, they decided to get engaged at this point. But she says in 2012, not long after he became my co-conservator, my feelings changed. You don't say. So you're basically marrying your dad now. Yeah, I think all of us would feel cooled down on a relationship under those circumstances. She says, I couldn't see it then, but I see now that having him tied up with the organization controlling my life might have played a part in draining the romance out of our relationship. You couldn't see it then. How much medication did they have you on, Brittany? That's fairly obvious why you felt grossed out now by the relationship with Jason. She said at that point she just stopped even sleeping in the bed with him, and she would go and sleep in the bed with her kids. She said, I felt a bond with them, and I just literally closed the door on Jason. Well, why wouldn't you? How could anybody in her life think that this was a good idea? Now, Brittany, what you're going to do is you're going to get engaged to Jason. I know he's a little bit nerdy, but, you know, you're going to get, he's stable, and he's going to be good for you and my grandbabies. Brittany, part of him getting engaged to you is him taking on that co-conservatorship. I don't want to hear about it. It has to happen. You can't go through this world by yourself, and your daddy and I aren't going to live forever. So Jason's going to have to take over here at some point. You know, and for Brittany to be like, well, it's gross now. But why, Brittany? Lynn even had the audacity to tell Brittany that is so hateful. You'd get out of the bed with that man and go sleep with your babies. That is so hateful. Why are you so mean and ugly all the time, Brittany? Why? Why do you have to just be like this? That man is going to take care of you. You know, and for you to just get up and shut the door on him and go and get in the bed with the baby, that's messed up, Brittany. How are you going to have a fruitful relationship with this man when you've already chosen your kids over him? Anyway, she said, I'm sorry, I can't help it. I just don't love him anymore. So eventually he breaks up with her, but like she could care less. She said he wrote her a long letter and then he just disappeared. He resigned as my co-conservator, says Brittany, when our relationship ended. To me, it seemed that he had something of an identity crisis. He put colored streaks in his hair and went to Santa Monica Pier and rode bikes every day with a bunch of tattooed dudes. Yeah, I think she really was saved there. She says, hey, I get it. Now that I'm in my 40s, I'm going through my own identity crisis, and I think it was just time for us to part ways. Oh, the depressing nature of the whole thing continues, though. I mean, it's like, if that isn't depressing enough, you're forced into sort of like this relationship with this guy who's willing to submit to the blood test and the weird conversation about your sexual history. And then, you know, you date him for 3 years. It's not exactly like the best. And then you find out he's your co-conservator after you guys get engaged. And then you're sort of like getting out of the bed with him and going and getting in the bed with your mom, with your kids. And then you get your mom in your ear being like, you are so hateful. And you're just like, oh, whatever. And he breaks up with you and you're like, okay. And then he goes and starts riding bikes down at the Santa Monica Pier with his dyed hair and his tattooed friends. I mean, it's just like, oh, meaninglessness wherever you look. She finishes this chapter by saying that the tours under the conservatorship were strictly sober, so we weren't allowed to drink. Once I ended up with most of the same dancers as Christina Aguilera. The dancers and I met up with Christina in Los Angeles. She seemed pretty messed up. But the dancers and I wound up swimming in a beautiful pool and sitting in a jacuzzi. It would have been nice to have drinks with them, to be rebellious, sassy, fun. I wasn't allowed to do that because my life had become a Sunday school Bible church camp under the conservatorship. She says the woman in me was pushed down for a long time. They wanted me to be wild on stage the way they told me to be and to be a robot the rest of my life. I felt like I was being deprived of those good secrets of life, those fundamental supposed sins of indulgence and adventure that make us human. They wanted to take away that specialness and keep everything as rote as possible. It was death to my creativity as an artist. Brittany at this point is this old, and yet she thinks that the way you feel alive is by indulging in secret sins. And I guess up until this point, that is the way that she has experienced life. But she has nothing with, even if she was allowed to enter the real world again, away from the conservatorship, I can't imagine that she would come out any differently. I mean, honestly, what am I even saying? She's out of the conservatorship now, and does she seem well to you? She's dancing with knives. You know, she's got the craziest look in her eyes. She does not seem like a well person. And I think it's because she just told us her recipe for happiness is secret indulgence in what you know or what you believe or what you perceive you should not be doing. And how could that ever make for a long-lasting life? That's why none of her relationships are that long-lasting and lovely and wonderful, because the way she feels alive is by being salacious in secret. And no relationship can withstand that kind of expectation on it all the time, like this, you know, hot and heavy and lustful thing. You know, that dries up pretty quick. And then what? You know, how are you going to feel alive then? If that's the drug of choice, if that's how you get through the day, if that's what you need in order for life to feel meaningful, how many experiences like that do you expect to have every day? Well, she says, back in the studio, I made one good song with will.i.am, which was entitled Work Bitch. Interesting. She says, but I wasn't making a lot of music that I was proud of, probably because I wasn't into it. I was so demoralized. It seemed like my father would pick the darkest and ugliest studios to record in, and it felt like some people got a thrill from thinking I didn't notice those things. Yeah, I think people did think that she just kind of walked around like a robot, because she probably did give off robot vibes. But she did notice things, and that would have just felt like, what is the point of me even speaking up? You know, I can say what I want, but nobody cares what I want, because if they cared what I wanted, I'd be out of this conservatorship, you know? So I'm sure that she did walk around an observer to her own life, and people thought that because she was silent, she didn't care. Finally, the chapter finishes by saying, after the X Factor, my manager brought me the offer to perform as part of a Las Vegas residency, and I thought, why not? My heart wasn't in recording music anymore. I wasn't passionately driven, like how I used to be. I had no more fire to bring. I was so over it. I had 2 kids. I'd had a breakdown. My parents had taken over my career. What was I going to do at this point? Just go home? So I went along with it. I went to Vegas the way everybody goes to Vegas, hoping to win. That's where we'll end. We'll pick up with her Vegas residency in the last and final section of the book. Y'all, I'm sorry. I just don't feel like I brought it when it came to this section. I was really over this entire part of the book. It just didn't have the same ring and the same revelation and the same clarity as the other chapters. And it just wasn't as easy to be sympathetic, because at this point, she's so devastated by her life, but so unwilling to seek, I feel like, actual change, that she would rather marinate in her bitterness over what has happened than to figure out how to get out of it. Before anybody comes after me, hear me when I say to you, her circumstances are extraordinary and extraordinarily bad. You know, I can't even begin to imagine how terrible she must have felt for so long. But then at the same time, even though these are extraordinarily bad circumstances, she's still alive. She could still choose to do different things. And I know that we're going to get to the part where she comes out of the conservatorship and then she's going to take control of her own life. But I wouldn't say that she feels, to me, looking on, as though getting out of the conservatorship was the golden ticket. It seems like everybody who was in the whole like Free Britney movement, maybe not everybody, but I think a huge majority of those people started to think once she got out that maybe there should have been somebody kind of helping her through life. Maybe not a conservatorship, but maybe some eyeballs on what she's doing. Anyway, that's the end of that chapter. We got the one more section, and then after we're done with this Britney Spears book, like I've been mentioning many, many times, we're going to be doing the Matthew Perry book as our sort of pop culture celebrity memoir, and then we're almost done with Trader King. By the way, if you did not see the last episode of Trader King, stop everything you're doing and go listen to it. So good, so juicy. After we're done with Trader King, our royal book is going to be a book on Princess Diana. I'm choosing Lady Campbell's second book, the one that was written after she died. I think it was printed in 2013. I'm choosing that one just because, you know, we'll get a greater span of things. Now, you guys who are familiar with my channel know my thoughts and feelings about Lady C's presence. I think that she's a little bit catty, but I've heard that the book is exceptional and interesting and well researched. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that that's true. So those are the books we have to look forward to. So almost done with Brittany, then Matthew Perry, almost done with Trader King, then Princess Diana, and then I don't know what we're doing after that. But I kind of want to do, after the Princess Diana book, I'm thinking about doing Courtiers. I know. I had put it off, but I think the channel needs it. I think we need more Harry and Meghan. I mean, do we need it? No. Everyone's always talking about them. And part of me thinks no, but I know who butters my bread, and YouTube says I have to. So I don't know. If you guys want to tune into that, you don't have to. It might bring other viewers to the channel, so we'll see. All right, well, I will see you guys later. I hope you have a good rest of the day. And the next time I come back here, it'll be for Trader King. I really want to get through that book. And so I'm probably going to up my episodes of Trader King so we can get to Princess Diana. All right, I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.